Oh, there we go. Stream is live.
Oh, are we live?
I'm keeping an eye on the actual YouTube, so I think he streamed to
I had
another.
to I had to change.
All right. I'll create it. We've got dead air. All right, there we go. All right, I got the new link now. I can see myself. Hello.
Okay, I just had the worst deja vu. You said something on here and then it happened again. And I forgot to mute the YouTube.
Link. All right. So we're live. Richard, if you want to begin the stream.
We are live. Hi. Sorry for the technical issues on my part. Sometimes my internet is a bit weird. Anyways, this is going to be a devil's advocate debate between John Buck and Dave. With John taking the atheist side and Dave taking the theist side. Which I just find this entire idea really fun. I enjoy both of these people, and I think we should just kick it off with Dave going ahead with his opener. If you are ready, Dave. Okay, go live. You can go now, Dave.
Okay. Yeah, sorry. It's I was on mute and I was sharing the link around a little. Okay, hang on. Sorry about that. Just ADHD and all that, you know. Okay, so I'm going to approach this one slightly different. The argument is an ontological argument, or you know, that we're making a case for ontology. We're making the case that God exists. But when it comes to God, we can't really do that in the same sense that we could say this vape pen. I mean, the vape pen's there, we could see it. When it comes to God, we have to use a different kind of epistemological reasoning. We have to come with arguments for why it's best to believe that God exists, or arguments that make the case that God exists. So rather than argue for God existing, I'm going to argue that, you know, we have good reasons to believe God exists. And I'm going to do this by arguing that there are certain things we would expect to see in the universe if God existed. And evidence is something that sort of raises the probability of some claim being true. So if there is some proposition that we argue for, and we can say, if this proposition is true, we expect to see certain kinds of evidence. Here we are seeing this kind of evidence. So the first step would be to say that if the universe existed, if God exists and God is the creator of the universe, we should expect to see a beginning to the universe. And we do have that evidence in the form of the Big Bang. We can see the start of the universe, which seems to fall in favor of the idea that the universe was created. Now, the universe could be considered a contingent thing. It relies on something else for its existence. It's not something that has just always existed, as we can see from the Big Bang. So if we follow the chain of contingent things backwards, we find that we can just keep going and going and going, but there needs to be a sort of necessary grounding. All contingent things must rely on a necessary grounding. So there seems to be something before the Big Bang, if the Big Bang is contingent, and we can argue that it is this necessary being. In philosophy, being doesn't necessarily mean like human being or living being. It just means like a state of existence. So from this necessary being, we can try to figure out what might have come from that in ways that would create the universe. Now, if what happened before it was strictly nothing, if nothing existed, then surely we couldn't get to the universe from that. And because from nothing, nothing comes, as many people like to argue. So it must be something with at least the power to create. Now, so it must have the ability to at least create the universe. And from that, we can only assume that a mind must have taken it. Because in order for something to bring something about, a mind is needed as a choice is made, if that makes any sense. So we can also see from the fine-tuning of the universe that the universe was created in a very specific way. If it was created in a different way, it might have collapsed, it might never have formed. So therefore, through the fine-tuning and the fact that it exists, we see that there is a choice made, and a choice for a particular type of universe, which also seems to land in favor of the idea that the universe was created. Now, something else that we would expect to see if the universe was created is we would expect to see signs of design. Fine-tuning seems to give us evidence of a kind of design. And when we look at the universe, it seems to function in very particular ways. Now, that seems to me to indicate design. Everything seems to have grown in particular ways. Planets are formed in particular ways. Now, we could argue here that yes, naturalism does allow for all this, but it still seems to indicate a kind of design at the lowest function of the universe, because the universe appears to have these ways of being. There are certain laws that there are. The universe follows these certain laws. We could argue that the laws are a sign of creation. Evolution forms things in a particular way. It follows particular laws itself, which again we would expect to see if the universe was designed. I'm not arguing here for a kind of special creation where everything was formed all at once. But if we think about a computer program like life, the game of life, that takes inputs and it creates outputs based on specific rules. And we could argue here that the universe functions in a kind of similar way. Now, we also get to the idea of, sorry, I'm starting to sweat a little here. I'm an old man. I'm not used to talking. So yeah, we can argue here then as well that the chips seem to fall in the favor of the universe being designed. We also have elements that we simply can't understand as humans. I mean, we might argue here that this is something of a God of the gaps, but to some extent, this is where we find some of the arguments for God. We find them in the ideas where, sorry, I'm reading the chat as well. We find them in the ideas where we still haven't quite got all the information. And even sometimes, even when we get that information, we're not removing God from the equation. We're removing very specific kinds of God. The evidence still seems to mount up for the idea that there is a creator for the universe. And if we think about the things that naturalism will give us, we're not expecting to see consciousness. We're not expecting to see rationality. We're not expecting to see morality under naturalism. That's not to say that these things can't form under naturalism. But if the universe was created by God and God wanted to create beings that had the ability to be good, to have morality, to seek him out, we would expect to see creatures that had a sense of morality and creatures that had a mind and had an inquisitive nature. And these are
1
all
minute left,
things
Dave.
that, oh, okay, that was quick. Yeah, these are all things that we see in the universe. So they land in favor of the idea that we are created by a God and that God created the universe. Okay, there we go. That'll do.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. Should I go ahead, Richard?
1 second, I just have to unmute there. Yes, thank you, Dave, for those 9.5 minutes presentation. It was almost right on the clock. Let's hand it over to John, and let's see what he brings to the table.
Mm-hmm. All right. Thank you. I shall be defending the worldview of naturalism, the view that everything that is part of fundamental causal reality is entirely natural. Naturalism entails atheism, so if we have good reason to think that naturalism is true, then we should thereby think that theism must be false. It can rightly be asked what I mean by the term natural. I shall be using the term primarily in contrast to artificial, much like how we might distinguish between natural selection and artificial selection. To say that something is natural is to say that it is not an agent nor the product of an agent's intentions. So, because theism includes as part of the fundamental causal reality an agent, namely God, that must mean that theism is strictly incompatible with the truth of naturalism, as I've so defined it. Now, by theism, I mean the position that there is someone who is all-powerful, all-knowing, and all-good. Theism is a type of value selection hypothesis, meaning the view that fundamental reality is inclined towards bringing about or preventing things due to the value or the disvalue that they have. Naturalism is a type of indifference hypothesis, where fundamental reality isn't inclined to respond towards possible values or disvalue. This is because only agents are the sorts of things that seek out the good and avoid the bad. So, if there's no agents at the base level of reality, there won't be any tendency towards or away from the good things. Now, naturalism, however, is still compatible with there being agents, just so long as they aren't fundamental. Unlike on theism, where God or the gods exist at bedrock, of course, you and I are agents, and things that we observe are the products of these agents, but we and they are all composite objects that don't exist as a fundamental part of reality. Now, theory comparison. When we are to compare the worldviews of naturalism and theism with one another, we need to take stock of how well they can each account for the data that we observe. There are two ways in which a theory can have an advantage over the other in this regard. One, in terms of its fewer ontological commitments, or two, in terms of its stronger predictive power. So if some observation is expected both on theory A as well as theory B, but A requires for X and Y to be the case, while B only requires for X to be the case, then theory B is simpler than A, since it has fewer commitments, and so can account for the observation better than A can. As for predictive power, let's say A and B have an equivalent number of commitments, but theory A is merely consistent with some observation, whereas theory B will actually have us expect to find that observation. So then theory B predicts the data better than A, and so serves as a better explanation of it. I suggest that there are three broad classes of data we observe throughout the world, which are all unexpected on theism, but expected on naturalism. The three data points form the acronym of CAW. The natural world is cruel, arbitrary, and wasteful. Each of these features are quite surprising on theism, and the fact that they are so prevalent throughout nature is strong evidence that our world was neither created nor is directed by an all-good, all-powerful being. Now, cruelty of nature. The first noble truth acknowledged by the religion of Buddhism is the reality of suffering laden within our existence. Just to exist in the world, we will have to both undergo as well as to cause suffering to yourself and to others. This is part of our biological condition. The animal kingdom is red in tooth and claw, such that in order to survive, an animal has to kill another, either directly in predation or indirectly in securing for oneself the resources that another creature needs in order to survive. Natural selection promotes reproduction past the point of economic security, to where there will always be those that were born or hatched into the world that will lack the resources that they need to survive, and so they will go without them, suffering from starvation, dehydration, or loneliness from lack of reproduction. If you exist as an animal in the world, you must fight to barely survive and persist, not because you enjoy living, but because you are already alive, and it hurts to be without the things that you need. Not only are you a victim to nature's cruelty, being cast into a world that inevitably leads to your own demise, but you are also forced into being a perpetrator of its cruelty upon others. It's impossible to be a true pacifist when you're alive, but suicide also requires an act of violence against nature, since you yourself would be harmed by such an act. The only way to avoid causing harm to anything is by never existing in the first place. Sadly, you were never even given the opportunity to be morally perfect. But surely God, if he existed, would want for everyone to always be perfect, just like he is. So he should have created us in a circumstance in which that was actually possible. But since living things are born into a system where rape and plunder are its essential cornerstones, this tells us that the foundations of the world isn't interested in creating perfect beings. Rather, the beings it does create were made with no forethought into how their lives will experientially go. Now, arbitrariness of nature. If God exists, then God would be perfectly just. But unfairness is contrary to justice, so God must be perfectly fair. However, our world is not fair in how it proportions punishments and rewards to its inhabitants when they are immediately brought into the world. And this proportioning could not be the product of finite actors, but to God alone. For instance, it's not under the domain of any humans or angels to decide which persons are born with their skin inverted and which ones won't be. That would be under God's domain of control. But as it seems most obvious, who ends up with the short end of the stick in life is completely arbitrary. There's nothing that they could have done before they were born to deserve that, and anything that their parents might have done would just be unjustifiable to hold against them. They were just born straight out of luck, while others are simply catch all the breaks. If the world was, at its foundations, uncaring towards the justice of all, then this total arbitrariness to which humans and animals were given bad circumstances while others were given much better ones is just what we'd expect to observe. But since God is to be regarded as caring significantly about justice for all, he'd not allow such arbitrary assignments of good and bad initial conditions for creatures to take place. So the arbitrariness of nature is strong evidence favoring naturalism over theism. And wastefulness of nature. Our world is quite wasteful in three significant ways: in its use of time, in its use of space, and in its use of living beings. As far as we know, it's taken 10 billion years before life even came into existence in our universe. And even then, the life forms that did develop were very uninteresting. Since only conscious living things have any intrinsic value to them, God would have created and been sustaining a worthless product for over 10 billion years. Why would he do that? What a waste of time. If God values things of value, he'd have no reason to create things of no value, so would have no reason to create our initial universe as it was. God could have created a world where conscious subjects are present within it initially, rather than as a spontaneous afterthought 10 billion years later in the development of our universe. How we find ourselves being so late in the game is what we'd expect if the foundations of the world were uninterested in bringing about things of value, since we would have just happened to have come about accidentally in this world. Our universe is also extremely expansive in how much space there is. You literally cannot comprehend how small we are in comparison to the rest of the universe. Why would God make the world so large when only the parts that can support life are going to be worth creating? God values things of value, but empty space has nothing valuable to it. So God would have no reason to create it and wouldn't. Whereas if the cosmos isn't trying to create things of value, it makes sense that most of its byproducts just aren't. That's perfectly in line with our expectations. Evolution is probably the worst offender of wastefulness, because 99% of the animals that come into the world do nothing of significance or value, only die in a mundane way for no higher purpose or meaning other than because reproduction is biologically incentivized under natural selection. So many species have gone extinct, and so many members of the species have all died off in brutally violent and senseless ways. It's such a waste. If God was all good, he'd love all creatures, and so would be inclined to give their life meaning and purpose. Yet, when we look to the world, we see no meaning or purpose in the vast majority of animal lives, telling us that there's no God watching out and caring for them. Now, these are the data points I find to favor naturalism, but of course there may be ways in which theists could still respond. However, as I mentioned earlier, any modification to the theory of theism will add to its complexity, making it less likely in comparison. Both the theist and the naturalist need to account for the need to account for the data by positing the same causal explanation for how each of these instances of evil have occurred. But the theist also has to say that there's some morally justifying reason that God had in allowing this evil to take place. The naturalist doesn't need to accept that every evil has some morally justifying reason behind it, so the theist has more commitments to its view than the naturalist does. which are needed. Yeah, all these added commitments make theism less probable than naturalism. Another problem, I guess, yeah, I probably don't have enough time to go into this, but we can go into it, into the back and forth. So that's fine. Yeah, I'll stop there.
Are you done there, John?
I mean, if you want to finish, go ahead.
Okay, it's
Are
like
you
2 or
done?
3 paragraphs.
No.
Okay.
Hello?
Wait, can you not hear me?
No, I can.
Oh,
Can you
okay.
hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. Yeah, that was excellent. I really enjoyed both of your points. I think we should just go straight into discussion then. Dave, would you like to kick this off?
Well, I was thinking I kicked off the debate, so if John wants to start first this time.
Yeah, okay. So I think that a lot of the data points that you brought up, at least initially, such as the beginning of the universe and contingency, don't really point to a morally benevolent God. Really, there's nothing to the fact of there being a necessary being that gives us any reason to think that it must be a all good, all powerful being. It could very well just be like a natural object that is just necessary. And from this necessary natural object, contingent things are sort of brought about by sort of random chance.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think that is one of the actual toughest problems for a theist to argue, is the existence of evil. That's why the problem of evil is such a long-standing kind of argument, counter-argument to theism. But in this case, I was mostly just arguing that there was a creator. In 10 minutes, I couldn't quite get to everything.
Yeah, but would a creator necessarily be like a supernatural creator? It could be like a natural creator.
It could be a natural creator, like we're running in a simulation or anything like that. I think when it comes to belief in God, the existence of God, yes, sure, that's an important point, but reasons to believe in God are more than just existence. It's one of those things where it brings meaning to people. It gives them purpose. It gives them ways of living. And I think really when arguing for the existence of a God, these kind of things get forgotten. Sorry, I got brain fog today, so.
Yeah, no, it's fine. And I was, but what I meant by a natural creator isn't even like an agential creator. So like,
you mean like a naturalistic sort of
like the idea I would
say,
yeah, say that there's like a necessary law of nature, and then that law of nature can spontaneously generate a universe, perhaps, like create a Big Bang, something like that. Like to me, that seems pretty much equivalent in terms of a story to tell regarding the beginning of our universe than saying that a God decided to create a universe like ours, especially when we think about how, well, our universe is pretty much not, it has very little value within it. And so it doesn't seem like the sort of thing that a value maximizing being that is all powerful would create. Rather, it seems more so that like, oh, the values that we actually find in our universe are kind of accidental because the thing that created our universe isn't really interested in creating things of value.
Yeah, I think in the case of something like that, though, it's hard to say that the universe is something that is created without any value and that we just assign value to it. If we think of something like moral values, we can see that there is a kind of convergence over the centuries onto certain moral ideals that even though we have different cultures, we have different religions, we have different people, different circumstances, they all seem to point towards a certain set of moral principles that seem to be the values that we should live by. Now, this seems to me to indicate that there are certain values instilled within the universe that we find through a kind of intuitive force and a kind of deductive reasoning. Now, if it could be argued that, sure, yes, under naturalism, we would still expect to see this because we would be beings functioning in societies wanting to live the best lives possible. But I think that the data point favors theism stronger simply because under naturalism, we would not expect to see this convergence of values in the same way that we actually see it play out in the actual world.
Okay, so just to get a feel for the argument, it's sort of like, okay, our universe was created in such a way that the inhabitants of it could discover moral truths and play out those moral truths in their living. Is that something kind of like
something like that? Yeah.
Yeah. So if we're able to discover moral truths through a sort of deductive method, as you sort of brought up through deductive reasoning, I see any sort of deductive reasoning as pertaining to like necessary truths. So if something's necessary, that means it can occur. It's going to be the case in all possible worlds. And so I don't think there's a possible world in which creatures could evolve that had like faulty reasoning regarding the necessary truths. Like, I don't think that a creature could I guess theoretically it could evolve to think that 1 + 1 = 3, but that's going to be very difficult, and that's going to affect its survival value. And so similarly, I don't think that if a creature were evolved to believe that, hurting people is actually good, that's also going to negatively contribute towards its survival value as well, in the same sort of way that having faulty mathematical reasoning might. Because, when you hurt people thinking that it's good, it actually leads to them being mad at you. And so they're going to sort of make you an exile. And so there's a sort of convergence of evolutionarily adaptive behavior and moral moral justice or moral righteousness, because being good to other people helps you flourish as a creature.
Transactional morality.
Yeah, something kind of like that. That like as we develop, we're going to be more inclined, evolutionarily speaking, to develop higher and higher moral faculties because it adds to our survival advantage.
Yeah, I can agree with that. I'm just thinking that the fact that there are moral truths that we are converging on is just a data point that is in favor of theism, because it is what you would expect to see in a universe created by a god who is instilling morality into it.
Well, I guess...
And I think...
Yeah. Go ahead.
I think we also have these sort of intuitive moral faculties where we get a sense of, we have a conscience, which is affected by how we behave. The morality sort of presses down on us in our choices. Sure, there are psychopaths where this doesn't affect it, et cetera, et cetera. But the average functioning human being has a sense of a conscience, and these things press down on us, and they seem to come from within, they're a part of our nature, this sense of morality, which again is something that you would expect to see under theism rather than under atheism.
Right. So is the idea that this conscience that we're born with, that's something that's not the product of natural selection and evolution, or is it also the product of natural selection plus God sort of like deciding to do that?
If you think of the idea of design in the universe, like I mentioned in the opening, God could bring about evolution in such a way that evolution is designed to bring about creatures like us for whatever reason. And these have become part of who we are because they are just part of what the universe is. Sorry, I'm not explaining myself very well. Like I say, I've got kind of bad brain fog today.
But yeah, the main question is just that: is this something that our moral conscience, is this something that's purely a byproduct of natural selection, or is it something more than that? That is like there was some sort of evolutionary history, but also God decided to imbue us with that.
I would argue that it's a product of both. Think of like punctuated equilibrium evolution, but God has taken steps during the development of the universe and gone.
I guess I just find it like a simpler theory that, like, if evolution can account for our moral faculties, that's going to be a simpler explanation than, oh, evolution did this, also God did this. Seems like, well, God's sort of superfluous then, because we're adding because evolution can already answer the question.
Yes. Agreed, naturalism is the simpler theory, but the simpler theory does not necessarily mean it's correct. I mean, it seems to favor both data points here, so we select out by going, this one doesn't add to the ontology. But if you consider not just data points in isolation like this one, you consider also the idea that there seems to be a beginning to the universe, there seems to be a choice in the way the universe was created, the universe seems to have been designed to come about a certain way. There's this sort of intuitive pull of the design in nature. When we look around, it just appears to be designed. We can account for it through, like I said, through evolution. But at the underlying level, the universe seems to have been created to come about a particular way. So when we add all these things together, I feel the chips fall higher on the theism side.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah, I guess we should talk about fine-tuning somewhat, or maybe actually we could talk about the problem of evil, I guess, because I was pressing on you. So, because we haven't talked about the problem of evil yet. Do you have a account as to why God would create the world so cruel, arbitrary, and wasteful?
I don't. Theodicies are kind of a difficult point here, which is why I think that the problem of evil it gets dismissed by a lot of theists, but I think it is one of those questions that is actually quite difficult to kind of counter. You have the idea of the soul-building theodicy, where the world is as it is because it enables God to bring about good people. It enables God to bring about good from evil. So evolution being wasteful could be a way for us to build ourselves up, become better beings by bringing good out of evil, by stopping evolution from being such a cruel thing. Yes, for millions of years before us, this wasn't able, but just because value wasn't found then doesn't mean value couldn't be found now. Perhaps that is the point. The whole point of it is to create good from evil.
Yeah, I guess I sort of subscribe to the Pauline principle, where it is better to suffer evil than to perpetrate it. And it seems like if God is sort of allowing all this evil to take place for the reason of, I guess, soul building or something like that, that's going to mean God is not acting in a purely moral manner, because he's actually causing evil to take place for the sake of some greater good that he sees down the line. But if God is like a perfectly moral being, it seems like he should treat every object, everything that's has consciousness as an end unto itself and not merely as a means to an end. And so it seems like if God's like allowing hundreds of millions of years of evolutionary predation to take place just so that, well, eventually there'll be humans that can come about, and those humans, they're going to suffer as well, but at least some of those humans will have learned their lesson and have been a good guy. And then once they're a good guy, I'm going to like allow them to enjoy heaven with me. That seems like a very wasteful and cruel sort of process just to finally arrive at that minuscule sort of reward. It seems like it would be much, I don't know, there's much better ways in which an all-powerful, all-good God could have done this sort of thing than this.
Yeah, I'm afraid I don't have a particularly satisfactory answer for that one. I'm sorry.
Okay, no, that's fine. Okay, so you also brought up consciousness and fine-tuning. I'll admit that these are surprising, I think, on the sort of naturalism that I initially laid out, because, fine-tuning says that the cosmological constants are of a specific value that allows for life, and naturalism tells us that there's nothing fundamental to reality interested in bringing about conscious things or living things. If God existed, he'd probably be interested in doing that. The problem I see with fine-tuning is that it seems like it's evidence not favoring an all-powerful, all-good God. Rather, it might be evidence pointing in favor of some sort of finite value selection mechanism rather than some infinite one. The reason for this is because the fine-tuning constants are like on a razor's edge, where like, oh, if it was one way, there would be no life, and then if it was the other, there wouldn't be any life. And it seems to me that like the thing that's selecting for these constants isn't able to actually change the laws of physics. All it's really able to do is to fluctuate the constants. And so there are some naturalistic accounts of fine-tuning that I find somewhat plausible. So Philip Goff, he puts forward a view that suggests that the cosmos itself is a conscious entity, and it has some sort of interest in promoting some value, but it's stuck with its laws of physics. And so it's able to fluctuate maybe the cosmological constants at this very narrow window of time at the Big Bang, but after that, those constants are set, and so it can't change much besides that. And so if it was given the decision to either allow for a dead universe or a living universe, it would try to promote the living universe, even though it will come with a lot of evil that comes about. But yeah, it seems like if God was all powerful and all good, he wouldn't be like limited into this specific narrow range of cosmological constants, because God, being all powerful, he could allow there to be living things on any set of cosmological constants or any set of physical laws, because being all powerful, that's just what it means, that you can do whatever. It doesn't require there to be these specifics that are in place.
Okay, let's take a look at the idea of something like, imagine the universe is just completely empty, like you argued in the beginning, it's very wasteful. Imagine that we are the only beings in the universe. The fine-tuning is fine-tuned in such a way that it allows, in this vast constant universe, it allows only one place. Mm-hmm. If there is a God who wants to show us that there is this kind of power that he might have and show that he has created this universe for us, it would seem that something like fine-tuning and only allowing this one planet and everything being on this one planet and bringing us about in a particular way would be pretty good evidence of design, choice, instilling value. It would seem to be like a display of power, maybe not infinite power. Perhaps God isn't perfectly good, perfectly just, infinite in power. Perhaps these are just things that we've assigned to God based on what we hope to see in a God. So rather than arguing for something like the God of classical theism, it's something just a little bit lower than the God of classical theism.
Okay, I see. So, yeah, you're more open to the God being finite in certain areas, and so isn't maybe all powerful, but is maybe still very powerful enough to start a universe. Would you also be willing to agree that God's finite in his benevolence? So maybe he's not all good. He's just pretty good. He's better than you or me.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's see then. So a lot of my arguments were against the full-fledged classical theism. But I think even if we take a scaled down version of theism that is like finite in his goodness or his power, we could, I guess, just do away with the notion of goodness altogether and suggest that God is maybe deistic. And so he's interested in creating things that are interesting, but not necessarily things that are good, and isn't really bothered by all of the animal predation that takes place in the world. And maybe that's a sort of good compromise between our two positions where, oh yeah, there is a creator at the foundation of the world, but this creator isn't all good. He's finite in his goodness. He'll only accidentally do good things, or like he'll do it as a byproduct of his intentions and not as a direct part of his intentions. And I think that might be able to account for both sides of the data fairly well. And I think technically still fall within my notion of naturalism. Well, I guess no, because I suggested that there's no fundamental agents to the world. So if it was an agent, that would be going against naturalism. I guess, maybe instead of it being a deity, it's some sort of animal, like some sort of creator that creates out of mere instinct rather than out of any intentional decisions. And that would make more sense as to why, there's all this evil and suffering, because like the foundation of the world is kind of non-rational. It's just doing things because it's compelled by its nature to do that. What are your thoughts on those sorts of alternate hypotheses?
I think the animal one, creating out of instinct, is a good idea. But again, the data points of the universe being tuned in a particular way, a choice of going from universe to no universe, other way around, no universe to universe, a choice to have beings on one particular planet, of a particular kind, because if the fine-tuning constants are correct, it has been used to create beings like us. I think that would show that it wasn't merely instinct. It was instead a choice to have particular events come about. But I think it is kind of a good compromise between the naturalistic theory, because a deistic God could create a universe exactly like us and still be, a kind of deistic God. It just, maybe we were created for entertainment like the Jade Emperor did. So I think that is kind of a good compromise, but there needs to be a way to determine between one or the other. Yeah,
I guess I want to sort of... No, go ahead, sorry.
I was going to say, and that seems to be the most difficult part, because we only have the sort of epistemological access to these arguments rather than any kind of, look, there it is.
Right, yeah. I guess I wanted to, inquire into your intuitions, because it seems like you're suggesting that because our planet is such a small area where life can be inhabited, that gives us more reason to think that our existence is special. I guess I'm kind of the different opinion, because like if I were to imagine that like I wake up suddenly on an island and I look out and there's like an infinite expanse of ocean surrounding me, I think that, well, most of the universe is entirely ocean, and it's only this little island that can support my existence here. It seems like that should make me think that the ocean is the primary, part of existence. And so whatever's primary in existence is probably what was most intended, or most, what was there for there for the reason. I would instead think that, like, if I were to wake up inside of like a snow globe where the only things that existed were part of my little world, that would give me more reason to think that, oh, because the proportion of the universe that allows for life is 100%, that gives me a lot of reason to think that life is something valuable to this universe and is something important and primary. And so that does make me feel special. What are your sort of intuitions there, I guess?
Okay, so if we think about value, the more there is of something, the less valuable it becomes. If we consider something like human life, we have 100 years, say. 1,000-year life just seems to me to the time involved in it just seems to me to be less valuable than the time in the life of somebody who's lived 1,000 years, because they have to get more done in a shorter time. The love and the caring that would come from something like that would be a stronger and greater love and caring. So just because something is more does not make it more valuable as such. It really depends on the agent doing that sort of appraisal. If you have, say, 2 Ming Dynasty vases and you smash one, the other one instantly becomes more valuable, especially in like a monetary theory. So I'm not sure a life teeming with universe would be more valuable than a universe with life on only one planet. It would seem to me that that planet would have more value simply by nature of there being a whole bunch of other planets that don't have any life.
Interesting. Yeah, I guess like I can agree for things of monetary value, because our currency is sort of based on scarcity, where the like things are defined. A thing's value is defined in terms of its relation to all other things. So the value of money or Ming vases is very much relational and is relative in value. Whereas I think for conscious creatures, they have a sort of absolute intrinsic value, to where by adding more of those sorts of things, you don't diminish the value of others, because, oh, you have 2 good things rather than 1, and 2 is more than 1. And so you have more good things in the world. I guess if we were to think that the less there are of conscious agents, the more valuable those conscious agents are. The most valuable state of existence would be God existing alone, because he's the only conscious agent that exists in the world. And so he would probably, if he's inclined to promote the highest value, would just retain his existence by himself. But I think that's kind of silly, actually. I think it makes sense. Like God adds value to the world by creating new creatures, were he to be doing that. And so, yeah, the fact that most of our universe doesn't allow for there to be new conscious agents is an indication that it wasn't designed for us, in my mind.
Sorry, why wouldn't it show that it was designed for us? Sorry.
One sec. One just interjection here. After this short exchange on this topic, would you like to move on to questions from the chat?
Yeah, we can do that.
Sounds good.
So after this topic.
Okay. Yeah. So why wouldn't sorry, ask your question again, please.
Why would the universe need to have the ability to have all these other countries? Sorry, like I say, my brain fog is kind of bad today.
Zones.
Yeah. Why would it need all those in order for us to not have the kind of value that I'm describing? Sorry.
Okay, so yeah, there is going to be value to our universe in the pocket in which valuable things are located. But since most of the universe doesn't have those valuable things within it, that just tells me that most of the universe is not valuable. But God, if he were to be creating something, would be creating out of a sense of value. So it makes no sense for God to create something that is just mostly not valuable. It's only valuable in some area, not the other. So like, imagine I'm buying a piece of property, and I could buy a square acre area of land that has like flourishing and like beautiful life and trees and garden and beautiful things like that. Or I could buy 100 million acre property with only that 1 square acre of surrounding. Sorry, 100 million acres of like desert landscape surrounding that. It seems like it would be foolish for me to buy the entire property when I could just buy that thing that I'm interested in. And so similarly, if God's going to create a universe, he could create a universe that has the things that are valuable within it, or he could create a universe that has those things that are valuable within it, plus all this expansive space that he's not doing anything interesting with, that has no valuable things within it anywhere. It seems like that's just like an unreasonable thing for God to do. But if God's supposed to be like the highest rational agent, then he wouldn't do anything unreasonable, and so he wouldn't create a universe like ours.
Unless the value comes from it helping to point us towards God, rather than the value of the real estate agent and what it can do for us. The value is what it can do for us when searching for God. That's looking at value in a very particular way. What if we are created with the idea that there is a God and we should seek him out, then this seems to be something that would add value, so long as people accepted the argument, obviously. And again, it would point in favor of a God who's created the universe with the idea that he wants us to look for evidence to find him as the creator.
Yeah, I guess my only point was that like this sort of evidence actually goes the other way. That when you look to how most of the universe is uninhabitable, that's indicative of a poor creator rather than a creator interested in creating things of value. But that's just going to sort of reiterate the points that we've already brought up. So yeah, if you want to say something else other than that, we can move into questions from the chat.
No, that's fine.
Okay.
I would actually like to respond to take on the devil's coat myself a bit there. What I would say to that would be, so potentially the inhabitants of Earth are the main goal of God. If there's no life outside of Earth, then the entire universe has this potential value of being explored and what's the word for it? Colonized. The colonization is always like has this weird taste, the bad taste in our mouth, like it's purely nominal colonization of the universe, which has a potential value for us to gain more knowledge. That's pretty much it.
Yeah, I guess then I would like if we were to think that God created an expansive universe so that the creatures within it could eventually colonize or explore it and like gain a lot of value from like adventures and different things like that, then we would expect the universe to maybe be larger than our particular planet, but not necessarily as expansive as it is currently. Because as it is, the universe is continually expanding to the point that we could never even reach the borders of how large it is. Like even if we were to like go all the way in one direction, it would be expanding faster than we would be able to actually like catch up with the edge of the universe. And so so colonization of the universe, at least to the extent that our universe is this large, is just not
maybe
feasible.
Not colonize all of it, but you can still look out to it and gather information from it. Like we can still quote unquote see. I actually did air marks, but I don't have a camera on. We can see what happened, let's say 14 billion years ago, by looking at that light that came from 14 billion years ago. So that's information that we're gaining, which is valuable to conscious beings. Anyways, that's my point. I wonder if I have any questions in the chat. I see Sixtra. I guess that's Sixtra. We have Math, Digital Gnosis. We have Monistic Idealism. If anyone you have a question for Dave or John. I think there's a small delay though, so we're gonna have to wait a bit.
Yeah, it's usually about 10 or 15 seconds.
Yeah. Oh, can you highlight Monistic Idealism's comment? If you
Sure.
click on it, yeah.
You can't cut the buck.
If you
sure.
click on the comments on the side, they'll pop up. I just find it funny.
Yeah, I pressed on the highlight message or what is it called? Pin message.
Oh no, that's
no.
pinning it to the top. If you just
if you click on it, it should pop it up on screen.
Oh, okay. Like, huh? How do I do that? I don't know this. I don't know YouTube. I don't know how to do it. Dave, you mentioned something before Big Bang from Cooper.
Yeah, that's just the idea that if the Big Bang started when it did, then there must be a before that. There must have been a non-universe state and a universe state. How there was time before time, I'm not really sure. That's kind of a complicated question. It could be something like there was a God that existed outside of time that had the ability to bring about the universe.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a sense in which we can use the term before in a temporal sense, but also in a atemporal sense. Like we can say that and the premises in an argument come before the conclusion. But that's not a temporal sense because the premises of an argument are just all there alongside the conclusion. But there's still sort of a logical priority there. And I think you could say the same similarly in that God, if he existed, would exist before the Big Bang, but not in a temporal sense. He would just be causally before. All right. Digital Gnosis said he had a question. He said, when did John get a Chad haircut? Yeah. Okay, a question related to the debate, actually. Thank you, Nathan. Jeez.
That is related to the debate.
I guess so, yeah. Yeah, so, Richard, if you just click on the questions in the chat, they should automatically highlight. Oh, maybe you have to, implement that setting.
Yeah, I tried to download something called Live Chat Overlay. I'm going to update the screen. But there's another question from Nathan. He said, do you just want to sin, John?
Question for Evil John. Is it true you just want to sin? Yeah, I know. The rumors are true. I love sinning. It's just so good. I like it so much. Which is just evidence against theism, really, because people like to sin. Sin feels nice and fun, and so if God were to create us with these sinful dispositions, that's just not going to be something we would expect from an all-good, all-powerful being.
Excellent. Let's see here if I can get this to work. I don't see chat yet because I reloaded or updated the browser.
Six Pack had a question. Oh no. He said, I haven't figured out whether you are Christian, Jewish, or Muslim. Yeah, which one, Dave?
I don't do these false trichotomies. Yeah. I'm actually a Taoist.
Oh, okay, nice.
Because I just like the Jade Emperor. He's kind of awesome.
Yeah.
And monkey magic,
There you go, yeah. Taoist theist. Let's go. Question for Evil John from Nathan as well. Why didn't you accept that God has a higher prior probability? Because he explains more stuff and is a simpler concept. Yeah, so I think the simplicity to theism is a little bit overblown. Some people will say that perfection is just a single property, and so anything that instantiates the property of perfection is going to be God-like. But I think perfection is a complex property. Even though it's just a single word, I think laden within it, there's a lot of independent concepts to it. So while you might be able to articulate, oh, God is such a simple concept, it's just a perfect being, when you like actually elaborate what perfection is, it's not just perfection as if it was like some single property. It's a bunch of properties all sort of conjoined together. Oh, all good, all powerful, all knowing. Yeah, metaphysically necessary and different things like that. So I don't find theism to be that intrinsically probable. I think I don't know. I think it's I think if we're being fair, and even if this is just a sort of cordiality or like feigned fairness, we should try to say that naturalism and theism are just as intrinsically likely, and then let's try to like figure out which one better predicts the data. There you go. You fixed it. Or you got it now.
I did.
All right, Dave. Oh, sorry. If you wanted to respond to what I just said about the intrinsic probability of theism, feel free.
No, that was good.
Okay.
Why do I reject divine hiddenness? Well, because atheists are just like guilty in their own sin, and they just don't accept God when he holds his hand out to bring them to him. So it's clearly he's not hidden. It's just that atheists are blind.
Is that like your actual like theistic response?
No. That's just one that I've seen popping up kind of regularly recently.
Probably for Nathan, I think that's accurate, but for maybe for
I think divine hiddenness is one of those things where it could be perhaps that certain atheists are just more skeptical. But it does seem unlikely that, God couldn't make himself known to those who were even the most like kind of not resilient. Sorry, my brain really
resistant,
is kind of resistant. Thank you. Yeah. Still getting over anemia. So kind of, yeah. So I'm not sure that divine hiddenness is something that can be rejected. I think it's probably actually one of the strongest arguments for atheism.
Yeah, I guess in this debate, since you are defending or at least open to a more finite conception of God, maybe God is just inherently limited to like what he can do psychologically.
What he can actually do,
Yeah. Maybe eventually, after everyone dies, their physical body is no longer hindering him, and so he's able to like fully enter into a perfect relationship with everyone. But prior to that, he's going to be limited in what he can do. So, I think at least, that might be a response that you could have take. John, what is the strongest evidence for quote unquote atheism? So I think the problem of evolutionary suffering throughout our history is very strong because it signifies a lack of care from the creator in how the processes are going to be are implemented. Like I think that theistic responses to the problem of animal suffering are very weak, hence why I developed my own response, which I find fairly strong. But at least with regards to like thinking about things from a purely objective standpoint, I think that animal suffering, given its great number as well as its great length of time, and given its like lack of seemingly moral reasons behind it, is just going to be the strongest piece of evidence on the atheist arsenal. You want to read that, Dave?
Dave, what is the strongest evidence for theism, and does God allow marijuana? I think the strongest evidence for theism is just something like fine-tuning and the existence of consciousness, because these are, like I say, things we would expect to see. I think religious experiences, while they're not strong evidence for somebody who is outside of that experience, I think they are quite strong evidences for theism, even if there are different religions that have sort of different religious cultures, different religious experiences. I don't know if you've ever watched Babylon 5, but there was a race of beings called the Gorgons, Vorgons. I can't remember now. But basically, they were beings that existed before the universe, and they were what we would consider to be angels, and they would appear to people in ways that their culture made them relevant. And I could see religious experiences from a god who has sort of limited capabilities, using those to make himself known to those beings. So I think religious experiences, even if they're different in different cultures, are quite strong evidence for theism.
Question for Evil John. Why do you reject renowned Christian scholar Richard Swinburne's assessment that the posterior probability of theism after reading his book is 0.99? I think it's because, well, let's see. What would be he's just suppressing the truth in righteousness. So, no, I think Swinburne's case is quite interesting. Even as an atheist, I just think that he's, I don't know, not taking into account just how powerful God really is, if God existed, in being able to create a world that didn't have all of the bad things in it that we observe. And so the fact that, if you have a being of infinite power, any amount of evil is going to be surprising that this being would create that evil, given it's all supposedly being all good. And so, I think that, especially given how our universe seems to have a lot of evil sort of baked into the entire process, is just going to be strong evidence against that, the idea that our universe was designed by an all-powerful, all-good God.
Question for Dave. What is the best evidence for demons? Project 2025 and Trump getting voted in.
Question for John regarding the problem of evil. Oh, hey, Matt. God is an infinite being that is beyond our full comprehension. Why should we expect to understand his reasons for allowing seeming gratuitous evils? Yeah, so I think skeptical theism doesn't really respond to the case that I've made, because I suggested that even if there are morally justifying reasons for why God allows the particular evils that we observe in the world, it's still going to be a more metaphysically complex system to account for these evils than the naturalist will have. So the naturalist, in order to explain why there are these particular evils, they just have to say there's some causal explanation for these evils, and that's why they occur, because there's nothing fundamental to reality preventing them from occurring. Whereas the theist, they'll have to also say that, yes, there is a causal explanation for why these evils occurred. Plus, there's also this like morally justifying reason that God has for not preventing that evil to occur. And I don't know what that reason is, but it's there somewhere. And I wouldn't expect to know what it is, but I'm still committed to there being some reason. And so the fact that the theist is committed to there being some morally justifying reason is just meaning that they have more commitments on their plate than the naturalist does. So naturalism is a simpler hypothesis that we should prefer. Well, if Dave wanted to respond, that's fine.
No, yeah. Question for Dave. How would you suggest someone who does not hold a presupposition of supernature to conclude that it is an actual part of the reality that we share? Oh, yeah. I'm sorry. I just realized I missed Sixtra's thing about weed. I'll get back to that. How would I suggest? I think the idea that I know a lot of atheists discount testimony as an actual part of evidence, but I think testimony is an actual good sort of, it gives us good reason to believe certain things, and it is evidence of certain things. And the fact that throughout millions of years, or say, since civilization, what have you, we have seen people recounting experiences with the supernatural. We have found that in a lot of cases, it seems to be people making stuff up, but there's no reason to believe that everybody is making up encounters with ghosts, encounters with supernatural beings. We have, say, the testimonial evidence of somebody like Muhammad, who claims to have spoken to angels and whatnot and been given revelation. I think if we don't hold the presupposition that it doesn't exist, we could look at this evidence and come to the conclusion that there is something kind of spooky going on in the universe that we just can't discount immediately like that. That would be about the best I could come up with.
All right, another question from Nathan. Question for John. Why doesn't the anthropic argument for God convince you to believe in him? Okay, so as an atheist, if I were to respond to the anthropic argument, so I guess there's two possible responses. One that I was talking with my friend Emerson Green about is potentially the anthropic argument suffers from the inverted gambler's fallacy, where we infer from the fact that something would be incredibly unlikely that it must have happened a great number of times, namely an infinite number of times, that being God's creating every particular person, which is in what Beth 2 number of, or no, yeah, Beth 2 amount of people. Yeah, so there may be something there. I'll have to think about it further. As for me, I was thinking about how if God exists, then the particular person that I am being linked to this particular body is going to be infinitely improbable, because God, being all powerful, could have linked me as a particular person to any other particular body anywhere in existence. So the fact that I happen to have been linked to this particular body is 1 over infinity, which is a very small number. And so, yeah, it seems like maybe whatever benefit that the anthropic argument might gain from suggesting that, oh, I exist and that would be infinitely improbable under naturalism, therefore we should think that probably God made me. It's like, well, if God exists, then my being linked to this particular body would be infinitely improbable, but it wouldn't have been infinitely improbable under naturalism, because there's no omnipotent being there to link up persons to any particular body. That was kind of rambly. I might write something on this. I don't know. But I don't know. I kind of like the anthropic argument, so we'll see. But it is at least something I've been considering as a response.
I don't know enough about the participation theodicy, I'm afraid. Yeah.
All right, yeah. Question for John. Why does the participation theodicy fail? Well, as an atheist, I think that the participation theodicy fails because... Okay. No, I'm just playing. All right. Yeah, if I were to be posed with like a theist putting forward the best theodicy on offer, I think I would say that, yeah, our world just has no indications that participation is attempting to be brought about in our world. Like, most of the past history of the universe was non-participatory. And so if God was interested in creating creatures to participate in the production of an ideal world, he would have started things off in which things could be participated in by those creatures. A theist could maybe bite the bullet and say, well, actually, the early universe was participating because panpsychism is true. And like all the fundamental particles of the world are actually contributing towards the eventual idealization of the world. But I do think that is a bit of a bullet from certain perspectives. And so, I mean, I do hold to panpsychism, and so it's not that much of a bullet for me, but that's at least a response. Otherwise, you are going to be faced with a bit of arbitrariness as to why God would have created a world that was uninhabitable and lacked participation for so long. But I mean, I think there may be ways in which the participation theodicist could respond as well that maybe doesn't require panpsychism. I just happen to like panpsychism, though. Question for Dave. Which of the 5 ways is the best argument for the existence of God? What does it do well, and why does it fail? I think he's talking about Thomas Aquinas' 5 ways.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm actually kind of partial to the argument from motion, and sort of like needing a first mover. If the universe was something that was static to begin with, then it would need some kind of conscious agent that doesn't rely on anything else to bring it about and begin that motion. And so I'm kind of fond with the argument for motion for, and I think it fails because, well, the universe could just have an infinite past of motion. What we deem as the universe in the way that we are, there's no logical contradiction in the idea that the universe is past infinite.
Well, there was a similar question for me by Friendly Naturalist. Yeah. Go up to 3. Question for John. How do you respond to the Thomistic argument for a first mover and the metaphysical deduction of God's attributes? Yeah, I really liked the argument for motion put forward by Thomas Aquinas and Aristotle before him. But a concern I have is that it doesn't arrive at the omni attributes of God, both in God's being all powerful and God's being all good. I think that you can arrive at there being a purely actual foundation to the world, but I don't think we can know what sorts of attributes this purely actual foundation would have, such as that it is of a purely benevolent character. I don't think that's something that can be deduced from the mere fact that it lacks any potential, because it could be something that is just naturally such a way that it just can't be all good. It could be a purely natural object that is purely actual that resides at the foundation of the world. In fact, that's been kind of a core claim from the Neoplatonists, that the one is beyond good and evil, but is in fact merely oneness itself. There's nothing positive or negative to it. It just is. And so, yeah, that's a notion of there being a prime mover with no moral attributes to it. And I think that's logically coherent. I don't think they're like somehow committed to a contradiction anywhere. And so I think, yeah, the argument for motion works in proving that there must be a purely unactualized actualizer. I just don't think that it proves that it must be all good or all powerful.
Sorry, I keep muting my mic. How do you respond? Question for Dave. How do you respond to the charge that God is a non-contrastive explanation, so it doesn't explain anything? Okay, so we have a circle, and this circle is all the things that we could know.
No.
I actually don't have a response to that, I'm afraid.
Haha, you stumped him, Nathan. Question for John. Why won't Capturing Christianity talk to you? I've tried to get on his podcast, but he will not let me on it. I think he's blocked me on Twitter, so I just play. But yeah, I mean, yeah, you know how I feel, Nathan. So he just doesn't want to engage with the intellectual side of atheism right now. Question for John and Dave. On the topic of the argument for motion, could an infinite series of dependent entities exist? Why or why not? Yeah, I don't think so. And I'm speaking both as my theist self and probably as an atheist self. Like, I don't want to, as an atheist, say that something fairly implausible might be the case, because I don't think it is very plausible.
How about you, Dave?
I mean, there's no actual logical contradiction to it. This is what... Sorry, I'm forgetting the philosopher's name at the moment.
Graham Oppie, maybe? Or
no.
British
guy.
Alex Malpass?
Alex Malpass, thank you.
Okay.
Sorry. Like I say, my brain fog is quite bad today.
Okay.
I generally like Alex Malpass's argument that there is no actual logical contradiction that can be pointed out, and it could just be a series of infinite dependent entities and infinite contingent things. I find it quite counterintuitive myself, and which is why God seems to solve this problem as the first mover. It's sort of like the argument of, infinite amount of people saying fire in a firing line. but I don't see why it couldn't exist. It just seems highly counterintuitive and unlikely.
And should we wrap up, Richard?
Yeah, I don't mind going for longer, but if you guys have things to do, then I think this is a good time to wrap up.
Yeah.
Nathan asked 2 more questions. But,
Yeah. No, that's fine. We can go do those.
The question for Dave, 2 for Dave. So Nathan, you have to type one other for John, and then we wrap it up.
Yes. Yeah. There we go. Make it
Question for Dave: why is God a better explanation for an necessary space-time first bitism? Maybe we don't do that one. How do God's thoughts make things true? What's your theory of how omniscience works?
It just does.
It just does. Okay.
It just does.
It just does.
No.
I mean, how do things go, Nathan? You don't know how it is that physics works. It just does. Yeah.
It just does.
True.
Nobody knows how gravity works.
It's true. Yeah. It just does.
It just does.
Depends.
Yeah, it depends.
Yeah. Okay. Goodbye, Cooper.
No.
Have a good night.
Yeah. All right. There's a
See you later, Coop.
From Nathan. Question for John. Why do you think consciousness is physical? Yeah, so I wasn't really defending a physicalist notion of naturalism. I was kind of uncommitted on what theory of consciousness is the case in my from my position of naturalism. So yeah, consciousness could be physical, could be non-physical. Either one would be consistent with the version of naturalism I was putting forward. I was just my version of naturalism was saying that if there are intentional agents, they just can't exist at a fundamental level. So if there are intentional agents, they must be composite in some sense, or like something that shows up later in the universe than from than being there from the beginning.
Nice. I actually have one question for the both of you, and then I wrap up.
Uh-huh.
As an atheist, John, how do you explain morality?
Yeah. I think that as an atheist, I should say that morality is objective, and it's just not connected at all to God's desires or commands or nature or anything like that. Because whether or not God exists, things are going to be wrong to do. Like it would still be wrong to rape a dog if God existed or did not exist. I think that we can know that this would be wrong just by looking at the types of things that humans are and the types of things that dogs are, and to recognize that it goes against our natural telos to do those sorts of things. I think that, you can have a sort of naturalistic form of morality that is independent of God's existence, because the way that we are informs what we should and should not do. And I think that a lot of theists are just not picking up on that, and from that are saying fairly implausible things. And I'm saying this both as a theist and an atheist, actually.
Yeah. So would it be like a Kantian version, or?
I'm fairly sympathetic towards like an Aristotelian account of morality, to where like
virtue and vice and stuff.
Virtue and vice, yeah, and just like we can sort of study what sorts of things are good to do and are bad to do for human beings. And we can do the same for like all other creatures as well. It's going to be connected to what leads to the creatures flourishing and not. So it's you can do a sort of science of morality for humans, which I find interesting. I don't know, there may still be some concerns, but I think it's at least a good start.
Yeah, sure. And then one for Dave. Why is the divine command theory so bad?
Yeah, you said you wanted to wrap up. We haven't got like an hour.
No, I'm serious. How would you, like, as a theist, would you ground morality in God, or would you allow for further necessary non-natural things in existence?
Sorry, what do you mean? Would you mind expanding a little?
Okay, so usually a theist would ground morality in the goodness of God, or like his person, the way God is. That is by definition what is good. But if you don't go that way, would you then be open to accepting a further necessary part of the natural world or the non-natural world, that is the form of the good, so to say?
I'm not really sure. I would have to think on that one. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
So
that's
good.
fine. That's fine. Yeah. I'm gonna have to thank you both. This has been really fun. It's been excellent. Do you have any closing thoughts?
No, just I enjoyed it very much. John wiped
Yeah.
the floor with me, but atheism is the stronger case. So
No, no, wait. Yeah, no, this was a good debate, and like, yeah, I'm proud of you, Dave, for like stepping up and doing this with me. Yeah, given all the things going on with you, and yeah, I think you did quite well, especially this being your first debate and all that. So hope I didn't like
thanks.
dissuade you of ever debating again. You get better as they go on. Although,
That's
come
it.
to think of it, a lot of the debates I've done, I feel like I've lost. So like maybe I don't actually get better, but I don't know. I still find them fun, even if I do lose.
Jumping in at the deep end seems to be a good baptismal start.
Yeah, exactly. Very good. How fitting.
That's
as
it
well.
then. I'll see you guys around. I'll probably message you both soon.
Cool.
No
Have a
worries.
great day.
Yeah.
You too.
Goodbye,
Take care.
Bye,
everyone.
Richard.
See
Bye,
you
Dave.
later.
Bye,
Bye.
everyone.